Okay, great. Yeah, it's good to be here, folks. Merry Christmas to everyone, and look forward to having a little conversation with folks when this is done. So, I want to just give a little bit of background on myself and where we're from, so you have the context. So, we're here in South Central Nebraska, about an hour south of Grand Island, Nebraska, if you're familiar with that. So, my brother and I have been farming here all of our lives. We're on the farm that we grew up on. We've been no-tilling here for the last 30 years. We're about a third dry land and two-thirds irrigated here in South Central Nebraska. This picture, this is what we want our fields to look like. We don't ever want to see our soil unless we go looking for it. And so, our idea of what a beautiful field looks like has changed over the years, and we want to see that covered. We're in a traditional corn soybean rotation area, as a lot of people are, but since we've gone down this path to soil health, we've been growing multiple things for seed production, cover crop seed production. So we're growing sunflowers and buckwheat and rye and barley and triticale, along with corn and beans as well. But we've been trying to diversify that rotation as we move down this path. This is what green cover looks like. We have been doing cover crops for 15, 16 years now. We started green cover in 2009. And in 2011, this was all a farm field right here. So all this has been built since 2011 in response to the soil health movement, to the demand for cover crops. And at Green Cover, our motto, our theme, our mission statement, if you will, is to help people regenerate, steward, and share God's creation for future generations. That's what gets us up and out of bed every day. That's what motivates us. We've got a great team now. We have about 55 people across a couple different locations that help us carry out this mission. Now, one of the fun things that we have gotten to do over the years, as being one of the first ones in doing cover crops, is we get asked to be part of different things. So like this webinar, for example, honored to do that. But a number of years ago, the Soil Health Institute reached out to us and said, hey, we're putting together a documentary on soil health. It's going to be called The Living Soil, which is a great name. And this is about a 60-minute documentary. If you've never seen it, make sure you go watch it. It's completely free. You can go to livingsoilfilm.com. It's been viewed like 6 million times at this point. It's also on YouTube. But one of the things that they wanted to do, and you can see the picture on the left here, that's a drone picture of us harvesting corn and planting cover crops at the same time. Because, one of the principles of soil health is to have a living root in the soil as often as possible, and so that's what this is. So I want to just share a little clip with you to just give you an indication of how things roll here. So they sent this very professional film team out, had this great big drone, and I jumped in the big 4-wheel drive tractor with the big 43-foot air seeder. And when it's headed down the road, and they wanted to, get footage of us going down, and I was thinking, man, this is going to be great. We're going to be in a movie. This is, we can be movie stars. You're just thinking all of these great things that can happen. And about the time that you think everything is just going great, God has a way of humbling us. And so things like this happen. And, this every farmer has done dumb things like this, but probably not very many people have it captured on high definition drone footage like we do. So a humbling start to this project with the film crew, but we got things patched up, we got things fixed, and we got to the field. And so I wanted to start out this talk by just looking at a little bit of statistical data for cover crops, because it's interesting. We're in the cover crop seed business. We've been doing this since 2009. We've seen growth, but it's not as fast as what we would like to see or what it should be. And so you can see, 2012, 10 million acres. 2022 is the last time they did a census. About 18 million acres of cover crops. So it's growing. But when you consider that there's over 300 million acres of just cropped ground, not range ground, but crop ground in the U.S., it's still a pretty small percentage. It's still only like 5 or 6%. And so it's an increase, but it's not as much as we'd like to see. And you can look at the states, and I know we've got people from different states here, so find your state. Basically, the darker the color in your county, the more cover crops are being done. And but it's, we see a good concentration of dark colors over here in the Chesapeake Bay, because they've been putting a lot of money into Chesapeake Bay programs. But by and large, we've got a lot of work to do. We don't have a high percentage of adoption. You can look for your state here. As far as number of acres, Texas is number one, Iowa, Indiana, then Nebraska. But you go on down the list, and in all of these numbers they've grown again over 2017 versus 2022, but they're not as high as we'd like to see. And so we feel like we can do better, and we feel like we need to do better because, again, our mission is to do this for the next generation, for future generations. And I know that's the passion of most of the people on this call as well. It's that next generation that is counting on us to leave the soil, leave the resources better for them than what we found it, so that they can continue to produce good, healthy food for future generations. And so, the question we often ask ourselves is, how do we increase the adoption of soil health practices and cover crops? And really, when it comes down to it, the old campaign slogan, it's the economy, stupid. Well, that's sort of right, but I think it's really the economics. And when we can show farmers that the economics of soil health work, then I think the adoption rate goes way up. So we have to help farmers understand the economic benefits of these practices, cover crops, but also other soil health practices as well. And so that's kind of what this talk is about, because, when it comes to farmers, for most people, but farmers also, there's no better type of economics than free stuff. Everybody likes free stuff. And so this talk is going to talk about the free stuff that farmers have access to. And I'm not talking about hats. All farmers have way too many free hats. Everybody has a free hat that they give away. I'm talking about the really important stuff that we have free access to. And so this talk is kind of called the 7 freebies. I like to call it the 7 free biograces for farmers. And biograce is a word that I just kind of made up because it's biological grace. Because when you think about the term grace, true grace has 3 characteristics. It's free. You can't really buy it. It's undeserved, you don't really earn it, and it's unrestricted in that everyone has access to it. And so when we think about what grace looks like, of course, God has given us so many graces, but within this realm of farming, there's 7 things that fall into the true grace category. They're free, you don't have to buy them, they're undeserved, you don't really earn them, and they're unrestricted in that everyone has access to them. So I want to talk about those in this conversation, and then we can have some question and answers about those things. So the 7 free biograces, are you getting your share? Number 1, the first grace that we have from God, the first freebie, is sunlight. It's solar energy. Solar energy is limitless. It's free. And plants are absolutely the best way to capture, store, and convert it to something of value. We talk about, we're a corn farmer, we're a soybean, wheat, whatever it is, but really we're farmers of sunlight. We're capturing sunlight. We're turning it into something of value, something that somebody would want to purchase. And that's what we do. And, photosynthesis, you're all familiar with this, most important chemical formula in the world, CO2 plus H2O. With the energy of the sun and the chlorophyll cells in that plant leaf, it's turning that into glucose, C6H12O6, which is a very simple carbon-based sugar carbohydrate. And we'll talk more about that later. And then oxygen. Oxygen is the byproduct of photosynthesis, but this only happens if we're capturing that solar energy. And so the main product of this, that glucose molecule, the plants don't keep it as glucose for very long. So we have this glucose molecule, but then the plants are taking that, and that becomes the building block of all of these other things, starches and cellulose and lipids and lignins and amino acids, fatty acids. You just go right on down that list. You can see the compounds. These are all carbon compounds. They start with glucose, and then they're using that to build other things. And look at all the functions. Every function that you can think of that a plant needs to grow healthily, to reproduce, to do all the things that plants are designed to do, those are all driven by these carbon compounds. And that only happens when that plant is photosynthesizing and is making that. So really what it comes down to is we need to get more energy into our soils, and the energy source is that sunlight. So the more energy that comes in, The more work is done, the more functions that can be performed. I like this. This is a slide that David Purdy from from England shared with me. Energy flow going into our soil system from sunlight. It's producing that glucose, and then all of these things are happening. We grow shoots, we grow roots, we have these root exudates, and then these organisms respire. This is the carbon cycle. This is how it works and how it happens. But it only is going to work when we pump energy into the system. And so I like to think about it, or David Purdy thinks about it like the soil being your battery. It's storing all that solar energy. And the healthier your soil, the more carbon you have in your soil, the bigger your battery is, the more energy that you can store. And when you have more energy, you can do more of these plant functions, and the whole system works better. The whole system is designed around this carbon energy that the sunlight is putting into the soil. And when you don't have it, your soil performs very poorly. And so getting back to solar energy is limitless and it's free, but we only can take advantage of that if we're capturing it. And so we can only capture it if we have green growing plants out there. Really, these leaves are like solar collectors. And you know, this building that I'm sitting in, we have a whole solar array on the roof above us. You know, it's a great thing. We're capturing solar energy. We're turning it into electricity to help power, you know, the office. In fact, the electricity I'm using to do this talk right now, yeah, the sun is shining. We're powering directly off solar energy right now, not off the grid. But those are expensive. That was an expensive project, and it's not very efficient. This is cheap. This is very easy to do. All we have to do is plant seeds, and it's quite efficient. And so the problem is, let me back up here. If I'm doing corn and soybeans, I'm only capturing solar energy for about 100 days a year. And, you know, 365 days, now we can't capture sunlight every day, but when you're just growing one crop, you're missing out on huge opportunities to capture that solar energy, to convert that into energy, to store it in your soil, to make it work for you. And so that's where cover crops come in. We need cover crops to fill these gaps, to capture that solar energy. You know, solar energy is wasted when it hits bare soil. In fact, it's not just wasted, but it's destructive when it's hitting bare soil. It makes things too hot. It will cook your biology. It will crust your soil. It heats everything up. We have to run that solar energy through a green plant in order to take any advantage of it. And if you're a wheat farmer, it's even worse. Wheat is harvested in July. Those are the longest days of the year come in July, late June through August. Those are the long days of the year. That's when we're cranking out the most solar energy. And if you're a wheat farmer, that is all wasted if we don't get a cover crop in there. There's a 10-month period of time in our rotation here between when we harvest wheat and when our corn starts growing. And that 10 months is completely wasted unless we can get a cover crop in that window, capture that energy, and we can convert that into all kinds of good things. Not things that I'm going to harvest because this is a cover crop, but I can convert that into nitrogen and nutrient cycling and livestock feed, all manner of great things for our soil and for the bottom line, but we have to plant that cover crop and get it in there. So when you have things like this, when you have bare stubble fields, we consider that a missed opportunity because it was an opportunity to get something in there, to get something growing, capture that solar energy. It's free. The government has not figured out how to tax us on solar energy, which is great. So take advantage of that free energy and convert it into things of value. Okay, number two. So solar energy was number one. Number two is carbon. Carbon is not a problem. If you watch the news, you would think carbon is the worst thing ever. It's going to kill us all. You know, from all the hype out there about carbon, I think needs a new press agent because it gets a really bad rap. But it's so incredibly important. It is free food for both the plants and the biology. So it's not a problem. It's a food source. Again, photosynthesis. We are taking carbon out of the atmosphere, the CO2 out of the atmosphere, or plants are also taking it from as it respires out of our soil, as CO2 is being generated from the breakdown of residues on top of your soil. The plants can use that as well, but that prevents it from going to the atmosphere. But it's taking that carbon source and it's putting it into this glucose molecule, which then again, like we looked at, contributes to all those plant functions. And so the process of photosynthesis, it's using the energy of the sun, but the carbon is the main resource that it's using to build these plants, to grow these things of value that we're going to sell, whether it's a grain or whether it's livestock protein. It's carbon based. So carbon is not a problem. It's free food for plants and biology. And here's really how it works. So you have this green growing plant. It's through photosynthesis. It's making that glucose molecule, which gets turned into all kinds of other carbon compounds. But it doesn't all just stay in the plant. It only, at certain times, as much as 50% of the carbon that plant is producing is leaked out through the root system. And I've got a cool picture coming up here that will show you this, but it's leaked out through the root system into the soil, into the rhizosphere, that area right around the roots, and your biology, your soil biology, pictured here, is eating that, they're consuming that, that's their food source, and then they're delivering something of value back to that plant, because plants aren't dumb, and if they are making those payments, those carbon root exudate payments, and they don't see a return on that investment, they're going to stop doing it. So when you're farming in soils that are biological deserts, your plants will not put as many root exudates into the soil, which means your soil does not get the carbon that it could have gotten, because Christine Jones tells us that the carbon that comes into the soil through root exudates versus the decomposition of your plant material, it's up to 50 times more effective at building long-term organic matter in your soil than just your plant residue decomposing. So it's incredibly important that we have not only plants growing, but having the biology in the soil that will encourage the plants to produce those liquid carbon root exudates. So here's that picture I was telling you about. So this is from my friend Jimmy Emmons. Many of you may know Jimmy. He's assistant chief of the NRCS right now, but really at heart, he's a farmer and rancher from western Oklahoma. And he sent me these pictures. He had a field day out at his farm. So this is cereal rye. This is the roots of cereal rye plants. Now, look at how that soil is just clinging on to these plant roots. That tells you that he has very biologically active soil, which is great. That's a good sign. But during this field day, he was doing some digging and showing people his soil, and he came across this picture right here. And so he took this picture with his iPhone, and let me just explain what this is. He has a little magnifying glass he can put on his iPhone camera. It's called a ProScope. And so he can zoom in. So this is a zoomed in picture. And what he did is he dug up some soil and it kind of broke apart right at a worm channel or worm burrow. So what you're seeing here, you can see around the edges, you can see the soil, and then there's like this big opening that's actually a worm burrow, so that's a hollow space. And then growing sideways through that worm burrow is a cereal rye root. And that's what the white thing is. That's white is a living root. And then it's got all these root hairs. Now this is not mycorrhiza fungi. You're going to need a much more powerful microscope to really see that. But this is root hairs that are coming off this main root. And the more biologically active, if you listen to the rhizophagy talk by James White or others like that, the root hairs are an indication of really active rhizosphere and biological activity. But Jimmy noticed something on this when he was looking at this. And so he zoomed in, he dialed up his little ProScope thing, dialed in for a closer look. So the picture on the left is what we saw before. Picture on the right is just simply a zoomed in version of that. And what he noticed, look at all this, look at all of the liquid droplets on these root hairs. So each one of these root hairs, look at all the liquid droplets. This is the liquid carbon that the plant is producing through photosynthesis. It's pumping it through the root system, out the root hairs, and into the soil. And the biology is coming and they're consuming that, they're eating that, that's their food source. It helps them to multiply. And these are all kinds of different root exudates, and the different root exudates tell the biology what the plant needs. And so then the biology will bring nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium or boron. And so this is how the plant economy works. The plant feeds the biology provides the nutrient. So really cool system how this works. If you're interested, I've got a whole talk just on that called carbonomics. It's how the economy of the soil really works. So you can go to our YouTube channel, the Green Cover Seed YouTube channel, and search for carbonomics. There's multiple versions of it out there. But it's just fascinating how this all operates, just much like the economy of a country. And it's kind of interesting as I was putting this talk together, just thinking about carbon programs. There's all kinds of articles that talk about the carbon programs for this or carbon programs for that. And I came across this article. It says solar energy developer secures $415 million to power the world's largest direct air capture plant. So in other words, this company got $450 million in funding to essentially build a giant vacuum cleaner that's going to suck in the atmosphere and strip out the carbon, and then they're going to pump that carbon down into a mine shaft or something like that. Well, that is not the world's largest direct air capture plant. Our green growing plants across the landscape is the world's largest direct air capture plant. All we need to do is plant more acres of cover crops, have more perennials, have more green growing plants, and we can do this. We can sequester all of the excess carbon in the atmosphere, no problem. We just have to have plants growing. We don't need to have vacuum cleaners siphoning off the carbon. Plants are designed to do that. Okay, off my soapbox now and on to the next one. Otherwise, we'll be there all day. So we have sunlight, we have carbon, and then number 3 is nitrogen. Nitrogen is free and abundant. And when we talk about freebies for farmers, we don't often think about nitrogen, and here's why. Because when we look at the U.S. ag economy as a whole, we spend $5 billion. That's billion with a B, $5 billion on nitrogen fertilizer, and that's projected to continue going up. Nitrogen prices are generally not getting any cheaper. And so how can I say that nitrogen is one of these freebies, free by grace? We don't have to buy it, we don't deserve it, and it's unrestricted. Everyone has access to it. If that's really the case, then why are U.S. farmers spending $5 billion to get it? Well, here's why. So if you look at the composition of our atmosphere, the CO2 that we just talked about, we can grow wonderful crops, big crops, and the majority of that carbon is coming out of the CO2 in the atmosphere. But when you look at how much CO2 is in the atmosphere, it's about 4/100ths of 1%. It's not 4%. It's not 0.4%. It's 4/100ths of 1%. Tiny little sliver. You can hardly even see it on the pie chart here. But yet our plants are very, very efficient at taking in that atmosphere, taking the carbon out, and then they push the rest back out. But when they're doing that, they're pulling in vast amounts of nitrogen. Our atmosphere is 78% nitrogen. Above every acre of crop ground in South Dakota, in Nebraska, in Iowa, wherever you're at, there are 30,000 tons of nitrogen. Just in the atmosphere, 30,000 tons of nitrogen in the atmosphere above us. That's why it's abundant. Now, is it free? Well, it's there for anybody to take, but here's the problem. It's both a blessing and a problem. The nitrogen in the atmosphere is held as dinitrogen. It's N2, and it's 2 nitrogen molecules bonded together with 3 sets of covalent bonds. That makes it very, very stable. It's very hard to break this bond, and that dinitrogen does not want to interact with anything else. So it renders it completely inert. I breathe it in, you breathe it in, we breathe it right back out. It does not kill us. It does not melt our insides. Like if you've ever had a whiff of anhydrous ammonia, you know how destructive that can be. It can literally melt your insides. This is very safe. It's very inert. But it's also completely unusable for your plants. Just like it does nothing to the human body, plants can do nothing with it. And so in order for a plant to utilize that nitrogen, it has to be broken. You have to break this triple bond. You have to combine it with hydrogen, combine it with oxygen, different things like that. And you can make these different forms of nitrogen, nitrates, nitrites, ammonia, ammonium. These are forms of nitrogen now that your plant can use. And so, man has figured out how to build these huge plants using a Haber-Bosch process. This was actually designed in World War I and perfected in World War II. And they were breaking that nitrogen bond, but they were not using this for fertilizer. They were using this to make bombs. So many of the bombs used in those world wars were nitrogen bombs. And in fact, some of you, if you're my age, you remember the Oklahoma City bombing about 30 years ago. And that entire giant federal office building was blown up with a truckload of ammonium nitrate. It was just simply fertilizer. It's very explosive. It's can be very dangerous when it's in that form. So when you're paying for nitrogen fertilizer, you're not paying for the nitrogen because you got 30,000 tons of that for free. You're paying for the energy that it takes to make it available. But what it takes, man, $5 billion and all these fancy things to do, God gave us these tiny little creatures that do the exact same thing. So rhizobia bacteria shown here, there's billions of them that get together and they form these manufacturing facilities. We call them nodules. They'll form nodules on the roots of a legume plant. So this is a soybean noduled up, and they are breaking that nitrogen bond. They're taking dinitrogen. They're breaking those three bonds. They're adding nitrogen or oxygen and hydrogen to it, and they're making it available to the plant. It's a super cool system, but it only works if that legume is willing to feed the rhizobia. Because as cool as rhizobia is, and it's kind of a superpower to be able to make that nitrogen available, they can't eat that. They can't live off that. That's not their energy source. They have to have carbon. And so the plant is feeding them carbon. It put an IV tube right into there. That plant is feeding them the carbon that they make through photosynthesis. And in return, the rhizobia are feeding nitrogen back. It's a super cool system. But it's not just limited to legumes. We often think, well, that's great for soybeans, but we can't get any of that atmospheric nitrogen for our corn or for our wheat or for our sunflowers. But we can, because it's not just limited to legumes. There are all kinds of organisms out there. They're called free living diazotrophs. So things like azospirillum or zotobacter, cyanobacteria, some of the bacillus, these organisms can also do that same thing. They can break that bond of nitrogen. They can make nitrogen available, and then they can sell that, or they can trade that to any plant, not just a legume plant. Now, the problem is, because this is great news, and we just should go dump out a whole bunch of these things, but the problem is where soybeans can produce 300 to 500 pounds of nitrogen in a 60-day period. If you're going to grow a big soybean crop, you might need 400 pounds of nitrogen to do it. And your rhizobia can deliver that in about 60 days. These guys, they are single-celled organisms. They're not building those big colonies. And so they're going to produce 30 to 50 pounds of nitrogen per year. Now, that's not going to grow you 250 bushel corn, but it does make a huge difference for a cover crop, for a perennial crop, for a grass crop. And when done properly, it can really help even within a corn crop system. If you're doing this, if you're taking advantage of the biology, farming in such a way, you can reduce the amount of nitrogen fertilizer that you're putting out for your other crops. So if you want more information on how all this works, I mentioned rhizophagy and Dr. James White earlier. We have a great webinar with him. Again, go to our YouTube channel. You can watch this webinar with James White, and he talks about how much of this happens. It's just really fascinating. We also have a great webinar with Dr. Christine Jones talking about the nitrogen solution. So a couple really good resources there out on our web page if you're interested, or on our YouTube channel if you're interested in that. Okay, number 4. So we got solar energy, we got carbon, we got nitrogen. Number 4, oxygen is freely available. Now, we don't often think about oxygen as an essential mineral, an essential nutrient for our plants, but it really is. And if we don't have oxygen for our plants, our roots will never grow deeper than where we have oxygen. And so sometimes oxygen is actually a more limiting factor than what water is. And so here's how it happens. You have to have gas exchange in the roots. And so in your soils, if your soils are packed in so tight that they won't allow that oxygen in, and the CO2 from all of your microbes respiring, if it doesn't let that out, then you have a real problem. You will not have root growth beyond how deep oxygen can get into your soil. And so the soil structure, your soil aggregates really make a difference in how well this is going to work. Again, oxygen is free because there's 18% oxygen, more or less, in the atmosphere. Plants can get that for free, but you have to get it in there. You have to be able to get it into your soil. So again, these charts from David Purdy, energy comes in through carbon, through your sunlight, but oxygen needs to move down as well. You have to get oxygen down into your soil because all these living organisms, they need oxygen. If they're aerobic, which the most soil organisms are going to be aerobic, anaerobic that live in the absence of oxygen, typically are your disease organisms. Your good bugs, your good biology typically are aerobic, which means they need oxygen, but that's never going to happen if you can't get oxygen down. So when you have soil that looks like this thing on the left, which just looks like a big old brick, you're not going to get a lot of oxygen movement through that. And so your roots are going to be very shallow. Your biological activity is going to be very shallow, and your system of generating this energy and growing things are going to be very limited. You really have a very narrow profile of what you can work with for accessing nutrients and growing your crops. Whereas if you have something that looks like this on the right, where your soil is proliferated with roots and you've got worms and you've got biology, that oxygen can very easily move deeply through your soil. And then you have this huge profile where you can be generating income off of. So plants can sense soil compaction, and sometimes it's just not a mechanical impedance. Sometimes compaction lowers that ability of the gases to move through. Ethylene accumulates. Ethylene is a hormone that will trigger fruit ripening. But it also will trigger a hormone response restricting root growth. So when you have ethylene accumulating in your soil, it can't escape because your soil is too tight. It will actually restrict the root growth because of that chemical hormone. And so we want soils that look like this. We want earthworms that help open that up. And, there's lots of things that we can do to do this. You really want to manage your tillage. You want to really manage how many chemicals you're putting out there, because these things can all lead to harder, more compacted soil. So as you're farming, as you're making decisions about your operation, be thinking about how is that going to affect the biological response through the gas exchange in my soil. All right, number 5, soils are rich in minerals and plant nutrients. Again, this is grace. Our soils have minerals that we didn't buy. Well, I guess you bought the soil, but you weren't really thinking about buying the minerals. They're there. They're part of that. Our soil is composed by weight of about 45% mineral content. And so when we look at our soils, we have all kinds of these minerals. Now, nitrogen does not come from the soil. We talked about how that comes from the atmosphere. But all these other ones, phosphorus and potassium and calcium and magnesium, these things are all coming from your soil, but yet we often find ourselves limited in how much those are. And so one of the cool things that you can do, and I would encourage you to do this, and I'm showing more labs here, but you can use just about any soil testing lab. This is what a normal soil test looks like. Okay, so it's telling me I've got 35 pounds of phosphorus, I've got 23 pounds of nitrogen, 436 pounds of potassium, and so on. But this is showing me what's available to the plant. That's what a traditional soil test does. It shows you what is available to the plant. So next time you send a soil sample in, do this with at least 1 or 2 of them. Request what's called a T&D test, a total nutrient digestion. And this is from Ward, but all the labs will do this. And what that does is this will then test everything that's in your soil, not just what the plants can get, but everything in your soil. So this was kind of interesting. This was 68 soil samples. They averaged what they saw, and this was just in 6 inches of soil. This was not in, our plants can access minerals from 3 to 4 feet of soil. So we would have much more than this, but in 6 inches of soil, here's what they found. They found 878 pounds of phosphorus, 3,700 pounds of potassium, 8,600 pounds of calcium, and so on down the list there. And so if you do a T&D and you look at what's in the top 3 or 4 feet of your soil, you will have lots and lots of nutrients. But most of them are not available to your plant. So you have to activate the biology to get them into a form that your plants can use. So if you want free nutrients, you need to have lots of biology in your soil, because that's what's going to make them available. One of the most important, one of the most critical in getting these minerals out of your soil and into your plants are mycorrhiza fungi. And so I love this article from a few years ago in Scientific America. Mycorrhiza fungi run the largest mining operation in the world. And if you look at this, this is a little magnified piece of feldspar. Think of it as a tiny grain of sand. These little brown channels are actually mine shafts. That the minerals have been dissolved, liquefied by the mycorrhiza fungi, and delivered back to the plant. Here's what it looks like. On the right, this is mycorrhiza, the brown, blackish brown things inside the roots. They grow inside the roots. That's the arbuscle. And then this is not root hairs coming out of this. This is the mycorrhiza hyphae. That's what goes out into the soil. That's what's mining. That's what's pulling in the nutrients. It can also help pull in water. Here's just another picture of what that looks like. And one of the best things that mycorrhiza can do for you is get you phosphorus. So again, if you want a deeper dive into this, Christine Jones has another webinar that we did with her called The Phosphorus Paradox. And she just talks about how you have so much phosphorus in your soil, but you don't have access to it from just the plants. You have to have the biology. Okay, and then number 6, as we kind of roll to the end here, water is given to all. Now, we don't often think of water. You know, I said grace, it's free. We don't buy it. We don't deserve it, and it's unrestricted. Now, unrestricted doesn't necessarily mean unlimited, but because we don't always have enough water. Water is often a limiting factor, but the precipitation that we get is given to all without discrimination. Now, I may not get as much rain as it does 10 miles away, but that wasn't because of anything I did or didn't do necessarily. But water is incredibly important because it's this other ingredient in photosynthesis. If we don't have water, your plants can't photosynthesize. They will not grow. So what kills plants when it doesn't rain, it's not necessarily the lack of water for the roots. It's a lack of water to make photosynthesis happen. And so plants have to have water in order to produce that energy in order to grow. And so when we look at the big water cycle, it's, you know, we often feel like, well, we can't really do that much to increase how much moisture we get. We're just kind of stuck. You know, well, you know, it didn't rain enough, so I can't grow my crop. Well, we do have some control. We don't have really control over a lot of the water system, but there's one part of this water cycle that we have almost complete control over, but yet people often don't do anything with it. And it's this part right here, infiltration. It really doesn't matter how much it rains. It only matters how much you get in the soil. And let me show you what I mean by that. So this is a picture from Russ Jackson. He's a friend of ours from down in Oklahoma, actually not very far from where Jimmy Emmons is. Western Oklahoma. Russ grows cover crops for us. And so his field is on the left over here. He's a good farmer. He's got rotations. He's doing no-till. He's doing cover crops. He's integrating livestock. He's doing all the right things. His neighbor over here on the right-hand side, same soil type, right across the road. You can see how flat this is. Right across the road, so there's not a change in soil type, not a change in rainfall. They had 5.3 inches in an hour. Now, the NRCS had been out a couple weeks before this. They had done a workshop at Russ's place, and they had measured the infiltration right here on his farm, and they did an infiltration test on the neighbors. And they measured the neighbors at 0.6 inches an hour, which you may say, well, that's super low, but that's not necessarily uncommon for a conventional tillage system. And so out of the 5.3 inches of rain that this guy got, he only got 6/10 of it because that rainfall came in an hour. His field could not take it. It all ran off to the ditch, and it's just running out. So out of all that, he got only 16,000 gallons of moisture. Russ, on the other hand, doing everything right, he got it all. He got all 6 inches. He got 144,000 gallons of water. He soaked it all in. And it's not just about your infiltration, but it's also about how much can you store. So when you have low organic matter soil, you can store about 1 3/4 inches per foot, which means you could store 189,000 gallons in 4 feet of soil. But if you had triple that, which a lot of our soils started out at 4 to 5% organic matter, you can store almost 5 inches of water per foot, 500,000 gallons in 4 feet. How much of a difference is that going to make when we hit a dry spell later in the year? Well, it makes all the difference in the world. And a lot of times it's not the fact that we're not getting enough rainfall, it's the fact that we can't take it in because it is coming. It's more sporadic, it's more intense, it's less frequent. We have to get it into the soil and then we have to store it. And then number 7, soil biology, the 7th freebie. Soil biology makes the system bigger, faster, stronger, and more efficient. I've talked about biology in just about every single one of these. The biological organisms are such a key to making this system work. And so they're free. You don't have to buy earthworms. If you farm the right way, they will come. And with all these other things as well. Now, even though they're free, you really need them. And if your soil is pretty degraded, it's pretty beat up, if you want to accelerate how fast your biology gets ramped back up, you may need to seed them. And when we say seed them, we're talking about you may need to put some inoculants on. Inoculants are generally not that expensive, and so your return on investment is generally pretty good. So while they are free, you can really increase how fast you make that system work for you by putting on the proper inoculants. And I'm not going to go through all these, but we sell lots of different inoculants. Lots of other people sell all kinds of biology. So I would encourage you to look at them. But what's even more important, whether you put them out there or they're already out there, you have to feed them. If you're not feeding your biology, they will go dormant. They will die off. And the thing that the biology eats, it's the liquid carbon root exudates coming out of those plants. That's what you need to have. So you have to have green growing plants if you want to feed your biology. So you can't have these long fallow periods between your cash crops if you want to keep your biological populations up and going. So again, I keep talking about the webinars that we have, but these ones with Christine Jones are so good. They're so rich. They're the most popular webinars that we have on our entire YouTube channel. She's got a great one called Secrets of the Soil Sociobiome that talks about all this association of how the biology is making your whole system work. And so as we close here, and I'm going to go through these last slides fairly quickly because they're going to be familiar for most people, you have to understand that grace is not automatic. Just because something is given by grace, it's free, it's undeserved, it's unrestricted, it does not mean that it is going to be integrated or implemented into your life. You have to accept it. You have to grab onto that and bring it into your life in order to make that work. So even though we have 30,000 pounds of nitrogen, even though we have sunlight, even though we have all this carbon, all these things, you can't take advantage of those unless you're being purposeful in putting them into action. And so the best way to do that, and again, we're not going to spend much time on this, we can do it in Q&A, but you need to follow the soil health principles and figure out what practices will get these principles involved in your ground. So you got to keep the soil covered. You have to minimize the disturbance, or as sometimes I like to say, optimize your disruptions. And that can be a chemical disturbance through herbicides. It can be a physical disturbance through tillage. It can be a biological disturbance through a fungicide. These are all disturbances, disruptions. You need to figure out how to minimize that or optimize the ones that you do, because there is going to have to be some of those done. And so you have to figure out how to take advantage of as few of those as possible. So this is a picture of it turned into this. This is an organic farmer friend of ours here in Nebraska, planted hairy vetch, rolled it down, grew 200 bushel irrigated organic corn with no fertilizers, no herbicides. Beautiful, beautiful system. Now, does it work like this every year for him? No. It worked great this year. Other years he's done it and it's worked okay. But, there's a lot, as if you're an organic farmer, you know how critical timing is and environment is. So it doesn't always work this beautifully, but when it does, it's an awesome thing. How can you maximize the diversity that you have out there? Maximize your plant diversity first, and that will lead to biological diversity. So diverse cover crops, you have much better root systems out there in mixtures versus monocultures. We are such huge proponents of diverse cover crop mixes because it's bringing that diversity into the system. Number 4, you need to keep living roots as often as possible. You got to feed the system. Once you build that system up, you have to keep it fed. So we want to see either a perennial rotation somewhere in there, or having cover crops growing when your cash crop is going down and dying off. That's what we want to see. And then number 5, integrate properly managed livestock. Again, it's a huge part of making a really successful system work. So I know I went through a lot of that really fast. We've got, I mentioned the webinars. We have lots of podcasts on our YouTube channel. We also have these free resource guides, soil health resource guide. You can download free copies of this off of our website. You can request printed copies. We'll be coming out with our 12th edition here in January. Hopefully we'll see some of you folks at some of the shows in January, February, and March, and you can pick up a free copy of them.